The idea of unwrap is to keep all the element size approximately the same, hiding the seams the best way you can. After cutting up the seams for the character, establish a plan of how you're going to be grouping your materials. There could be many ways of tackling this problem. You could have separate texture maps for just leather, or metal UV islands, even from multiple characters on a single map. Specific shader should be used for the skin, the eyes, and different types of materials that the character wears. In my example, I'm keeping all my materials on one texture map, yet I'm grouping them close together for a purpose that I'll explain a bit further in the video about texturing. Furthermore, not all my UVs are on one by one. Let me show you. As you can see here, some of the elements are actually going off one by one, and I did it on purpose. These pieces are, as you can see here, it's the leather armor piece for the character, and one part of it is in the one by one and the other is outside. And to visually demonstrate, this was my plan, having it all separated. This whole piece, this whole part of it, occupied by the leather big texture. And to visually show what I mean, if I drag that plan of mine onto the character, then you'll be able to see the offset elements actually occupying the same space, the same texture, but they are slightly shifted. This will give the character additional uniqueness because those two parts now won't look the same. Here you can argue it depends. It really does depend of how you're going to texture. But for this particular example, I gave slight uniqueness through using 3D coat to the character, little wrinkles and scars, etc. So even though I could have mapped my skin in one corner, so I have for instance, my skin here, and my rags here, and all my metals here, etc. That won't really work because they still need to occupy their own unique UV space for me to add those unique elements to it, such as dents and scars and so on. I mean, this idea will become more clear as we go through this, but just visually I wanted to show you how I kind of set up my UV islands to begin with. The idea of packing textures for props versus characters slightly differs. I have to put a big asterisk around this idea, but usually you'd want to load in a single texture for the character and multiple 4-way tileable textures for the props. In terms of organization, it comes down to the ability of loading a texture into level only once. Also, best practice is to tuck away your masks into alpha channels. For starters, texel density should be maintained throughout. Yet depending on the texture you're using and how much screen space the mesh will occupy, you might have certain leeway in scaling up or down UVs of the mesh. It's extremely case by case dependent. Looking back at the model now, I see a flaw with having two legs separate but only one arm. The arms take up more screen space than legs, so it would have been more logical to have the leg UVs overlapping and the arm taking up their own separate space. Likewise, the inner parts of the mouth is way too big, even though they're the correct scale in proportion to the face. As you can see, this is the top portion of the mouth. This is the bottom portion of the inner mouth, and they're correct scale in proportion to the character. But as you can see, for instance, these islands, they represent legs. If you compare the legs to the arms are more visible. If the camera is going to be kind of 3/4 down looking at the character in that particular view, then the arms are more prominent than the legs. But I mean, to be truthful, the legs also stand out. But I mean, my point is that maybe it would have been smarter to overlap the legs, but then make the arms separate, so I would be able to add additional unique detail to both of those arms instead of them just being one right now. And possibly I could have made it bigger, and the inner parts of the mouth I could have made it smaller, because you can't really even, first of all, they're solid color I think for the most point, and you can't really tell because the character doesn't really open his mouth. Those are the things that I would have changed if I had another go at it. It's much easier to understand the unwrapping when you start dealing with the actual texturing of it. So let's move on, talk about a couple of ideas about the first pass for the character.